When you think of German armour in World War II, you think Tigers, you think Panthers, massive steel predators with names that sound like they belong on a metal album cover. But the vehicle with arguably the highest kill count of any German armoured fighting vehicle, most people scroll right past it. A little diamond in the rough, no turret, no fame, no poster on anybody's wall. Just a low-slung box on a Panzer III chassis that by war's end, German records credited with roughly 30,000 enemy tank and armoured vehicle kills. 30,000. That's a number worth sitting with for a second, because it's either one of the most remarkable combat records in the history of mechanized warfare, or one of the most inflated propaganda figures ever compiled. We're going to get into that. But first, you need to understand something about how Germany built its war machines. A story that starts with disciplined, brilliant engineering and ends somewhere close to madness. The vehicle in question is the Sturmgeschütz III, the StuG III. And here's the absurd part. It wasn't even designed to fight tanks. When Erich von Manstein proposed the concept back in 1936, he wanted a low-profile, armoured gun that could roll alongside infantry and blow up bunkers. Direct fire support, nothing more. The first 30 units, the Ausführung A models, rolled off the Alkett factory line in Berlin in January 1940, mounting a short-barreled 75mm StuK 37 that was purpose-built for lobbing high-explosive shells at fortified positions. A bunker buster, not a tank killer. But the design logic underneath it, that's where the genius lived. They took the Panzer III chassis, Germany's most proven, most reliable medium tank platform, and ripped the turret off. Gone. And a turret, by the way, is the single most expensive and mechanically complex component on any tank. Without it, the StuG III stood just 2.16 meters tall. A Tiger I, 3 meters. Nearly half again as large a target. So you've got a vehicle that's cheaper to build, faster to produce, harder to see, and it slides right onto existing Panzer III production lines without retooling. Each one cost roughly 82,500 Reichsmarks. A Tiger one ran north of 250,000. Do the math. Germany could stamp out 3 StuG IIIs for every single Tiger. 3 invisible ambush killers for 1 magnificent breakdown magnet. Now, the StuG III didn't become a tank destroyer by design. It became one by desperation. When Operation Barbarossa hit the Soviet Union in June 1941, German crews ran headlong into T-34s and KV-1s, tanks that the short-barreled 75mm couldn't reliably penetrate. The fix came in March 1942 with the Ausführung F variant, which mounted the long-barreled 75mm StuK 40. Suddenly, this little infantry support gun could kill a T-34 at combat ranges. And it arrived at exactly the moment Germany needed tank destroyers most. Because by 1942, the Wehrmacht was being pushed onto the defensive across enormous stretches of the Eastern Front. Defensive warfare is where a turretless ambush vehicle becomes a nightmare for the attacker. Picture it. A StuG III hull down behind a ridge, tucked into a tree line. Profile so low, it's practically part of the landscape. A column of T-34s rolling down a frozen road. The StuG fires first. In armoured combat, firing first is almost everything. The crew reloads, fires again, and the column is burning before the Soviet tankers even identify where the shots came from. Multiply that across thousands of engagements, thousands of vehicles, 3 years of grinding defensive warfare on the Eastern Front, and you start to understand how those kill numbers accumulated. So, about those 30,000 kills. The number comes from German wartime tallies, compiled from individual Sturmgeschütz brigade and battalion after-action reports. By early 1944, the cumulative count had reportedly passed 20,000. By war's end, the total sat at roughly 30,000 enemy armoured vehicles destroyed. And yeah, you should be sceptical. These were self-reported unit claims. Every nation in that war inflated kill counts. Allied air forces routinely overclaimed by factors of 2 or 3. Soviet tank reports were generous to the point of fiction. German ground forces weren't any different. Duplicate claims were endemic. 3 crews all taking credit for the same burning T-34. Vehicles that got knocked out, recovered and repaired were counted as permanent kills. Historians like Thomas Jentz, who spent decades mining German primary source records for his Panzer III series, treat the figure with serious caution. Cut it in half. Cut it by 2/3 if you want. Even 10 to 15,000 confirmed kills across 10,500 StuG IIIs produced gives you a kill-to-production ratio that no other German armoured vehicle comes anywhere close to matching. The Tiger I? Roughly 1,350 built, claiming about 9,850 kills total. Impressive per vehicle, sure, but a fraction of the StuG's aggregate impact on the war. How much of this is propaganda and how much is real? That's the question, and honestly, that's kind of the point. The number is big enough to be extraordinary and fuzzy enough to argue about forever. Production tells the rest of the story. The StuG, the definitive late-war variant, introduced December 1942, accounted for roughly 7,800 units on its own. Add all variants from A through G, plus about 1,200 StuH-42 howitzer variants on the same chassis, and total production hits approximately 11,300 vehicles. The single most produced German fully tracked armoured fighting vehicle of the entire war. Not the Tiger, not the Panther, a turretless box that nobody puts on a model kit. And this is where most coverage stops. StuG III, big numbers, moving on. But there's a vehicle that keeps falling through the cracks of every documentary, every video essay, and the people who know their stuff keep asking the same question. Where's the Jagdpanzer IV? 3 words. That's all it takes to identify the biggest gap in popular tank destroyer coverage. Because the Jagdpanzer IV wasn't just effective, it was the philosophical heir to the StuG III, the same design logic applied to Germany's other workhorse chassis, and it fought in virtually every major engagement of the war's final 18 months. The concept was straightforward. Take the Panzer IV chassis, Germany's most produced, most reliable medium tank, and give it the StuG treatment. Fixed superstructure, no turret, low profile. The initial version mounted the proven 75mm PaK 39L/48, the same gun that had made the StuG III lethal. Production started at the Vormag factory in Plauen in January 1944, and what came off the line was, in a lot of ways, a near-perfect vehicle for what Germany needed in early 1944. Frontal armour sloped at 60 degrees, giving effective protection well beyond what the raw thickness suggested. Reliable chassis. Crews drawn from Panzer IV units who already knew the mechanical bones of the thing by heart. Roughly 770 of the L/48 variant were built. They served on both the eastern and western fronts. Guderian was conflicted about the whole program, and his objection is worth understanding because it reveals something important about what was happening inside the German war machine. He didn't think the Jagdpanzer IV was bad, it was excellent. His problem was strategic. Every Panzer IV chassis that went to Jagdpanzer IV production was a turreted Panzer IV medium tank that the Wehrmacht would never get. An army that can only defend is an army waiting to lose. He wasn't wrong. But by 1944, the strategic reality had bulldozed the strategic theory. Germany was on the defensive everywhere, and defensive vehicles were what the front was screaming for. But here's the thing. The Jagdpanzer IV's story contains a crack. A hairline fracture that shows the over-engineering disease creeping back in, even inside an otherwise practical program. The L/48 version was balanced. It worked. Naturally, someone decided it needed a bigger gun. Enter the Jagdpanzer IV/70, mounting the longer 75mm L/70, the same weapon carried by the Panther. On paper, a serious upgrade in penetrating power. In reality, the L/70 was substantially longer and heavier than the L/48, and cramming it into the forward superstructure made the vehicle dramatically nose-heavy. Front road wheels ground down under constant strain. Suspension components failed at accelerated rates. Crews reported sluggish, unpredictable steering on soft ground. The very thing that made the L/48 version a joy to fight from, balanced handling on a proven chassis, was wrecked by the hunger for a bigger gun. Wehrmacht built about 930 of the /70V variant. Alkett added roughly 278 of the /70A on a slightly different superstructure. Combined with the original, total Jagdpanzer IV production hit about 1,980 units. 2,000 vehicles. Fighting everywhere from Normandy to the Ardennes to the final collapse in the east. And somehow, nobody talks about them. Then there's the Hetzer. If the StuG III is the workhorse and the Jagdpanzer IV is the overlooked successor, the Hetzer is the scrappy underdog that shouldn't have worked as well as it did. Formerly designated the Jagdpanzer XXXVIII, it was built on the chassis of the obsolete Czech-designed Panzer XXXVIII, a light tank that was hopelessly outdated as a fighting vehicle by 1944, but whose chassis was mechanically sound and, crucially, still in production at BMM in Prague. Guderian himself championed the concept. Take a chassis that has no other useful purpose, slap a 75mm gun on it, make it cheap, make it small, make a lot of them. And they did. Approximately 2,584 Hetzers were produced between April 1944 and May 1945. Small, light, concealable. Perfect for the ambush and retreat defensive warfare that defined Germany's final year. The gun was adequate. The profile was tiny. Czech factories in Prague weren't being hammered by Allied bombers the way German plants were, which meant production kept flowing even as the rest of German industry crumbled. It wasn't comfortable. Crews hated the interior, notoriously cramped, with limited gun traverse and ergonomics that seemed designed by someone who'd never met a human body. But it worked. And here's a detail that says more than any combat statistic. After the war ended, Switzerland kept the Hetzer in active military service, a variant designated the G13 that was still running into the 1970s. 3 full decades after the last Tiger had been towed to a museum. The boring, practical, unglamorous machine outlived the Reich that built it by a generation. So, StuG III, Jagdpanzer IV, Hetzer. Cheap, proven, effective. This was the path Germany could have walked. Mass production of adequate vehicles on reliable chassis, leveraging industrial efficiency and crew skill to offset numerical inferiority. And to some extent, they did walk it. These vehicles were produced by the thousands, and they shaped the fighting on both fronts. But the German war machine was walking two paths at once. And the other path, the one paved with prestige and obsession, leads somewhere genuinely insane. Someone once described it perfectly. The engineers took the biggest gun they could find and built a vehicle around it. We already talked about the Ferdinand. 91 vehicles built from orphaned Porsche Tiger chassis that lost the Henschel competition, born not from tactical need, but from bureaucratic refusal to write off sunk costs. 65 tons, a petrol-electric hybrid drivetrain so mechanically fragile that Ferdinands broke down on approach marches before reaching Soviet lines at Kursk in the summer of 1943. No hull machine gun, the single most catastrophic design flaw on the Ferdinand, because somebody decided a tank destroyer only needed to kill tanks. Red Army infantry figured that out fast. They let the Ferdinands roll past, then swarmed from the sides and rear with magnetic mines, Molotov cocktails, explosive charges shoved against the tracks. Immobilized crews, trapped inside 65 tons of steel, with no way to shoot back at soldiers standing meters away. Of roughly 89 Ferdinands committed to Kursk, about 39 were lost during the fighting. Nearly half the entire force. And a huge proportion of those losses came from mechanical breakdown and infantry action, not enemy armour. Guderian's assessment was bleak. The vehicle's inability to engage close-range infantry resulted in needless losses. The survivors limped to Austria for retrofit. Hull machine gun finally added, wider tracks, commander's cupola, redesignated as the Elephant. They fought at Anzio. They returned to the Eastern Front, but the force never recovered. And the lesson? Not learned. Not even close. Because the Jagdtiger was already in development. And the Jagdtiger makes the Ferdinand look reasonable. 72 tons. Let that land. 72 tons. The heaviest armoured fighting vehicle to see operational service in the entire war. It mounted a 128mm PaK-44, a gun derived from naval and anti-aircraft weapons, capable of destroying anything on the battlefield at ranges that bordered on the absurd. The gun wasn't the problem. The gun was magnificent. Everything around the gun was a catastrophe. Only 88 were built. They couldn't be recovered by standard towing vehicles when they broke down, and they broke down constantly, because nothing in the Wehrmacht's inventory could pull 72 tons out of a ditch. Bridges collapsed under them, roads crumbled. Fuel consumption was astronomical at a moment when Germany was rationing every litre of gasoline. Crews who could have been fighting in StuG IIIs or Jagdpanzer IVs, proven vehicles on proven chassis, were instead babysitting mechanical disasters that spent more time awaiting repair or abandoned by roadsides than they spent in combat. When they did fight, the 128mm gun was devastating. But you can't fight if you can't get to the fight. The Jagdtiger is the logical endpoint of a philosophy that started asking, what if we just made it bigger, and never stopped? It's the Ferdinand dialed up to 11. And when you put it side by side with the StuG III, the contrast isn't just stark, it's damning. For the resources consumed by 88 Jagdtigers, Germany could have produced roughly 700 to 800 StuG IIIs. 700 plus reliable, proven tank destroyers that could reach the battlefield, hide in a tree line, and kill T-34s and Shermans all day long without needing a specialized recovery vehicle just to get home. This is the arc, 1940 to 1945. Disciplined pragmatism to engineering insanity. The StuG III to the Jagdtiger. A philosophy that began by asking, what's adequate, and ended by asking, what's impressive? And the gap between those two questions consumed resources, crews, and ultimately any slim hope of slowing the Allied advance. So which was the best German tank destroyer? I'm going to commit to an answer, and you're going to want to argue with me. Good. It's the StuG III. Not because of the 30,000 kill claim, that number is debatable and should be debated. Not because it was the most powerful, because it wasn't. The Jagdpanzer IV/70's gun could penetrate more armour. The Hetzer delivered more combat capability per ton and per Reichsmark than anything else in the German arsenal. The Jagdpanzer IV-L/48 might have been the most balanced design of the bunch. But the StuG III was built over 10,000 times, not even counting the StuG 42 howitzer variants. It fought from France in 1940 to Berlin in 1945. It evolved from infantry support to tank destroyer without a fundamental redesign, just a better gun bolted into the same proven package. It was cheap enough to mass produce, reliable enough to keep running, small enough to hide, and lethal enough to kill anything it faced at combat ranges. It shaped more battles on more fronts than any other German armoured vehicle, including the Tiger, including the Panther, including every famous machine that gets the documentary treatment. The best German tank destroyer wasn't glamorous, wasn't famous, wasn't remotely related to the Tiger. It was a turretless box that worked, kept working, and kept killing, while the engineering marvels broke down on the road behind it. Now I want to hear your pick. Was it the StuG, the Jagdpanzer IV that nobody covers, the scrappy little Hetzer? Drop it in the comments. And if you think I got the 30,000 number wrong, tell me why. Subscribe for more stories like this.